Today I'm going to talk about forest plantings and group plantings. In bonsai, the forests and groups are like the poor relatives of bonsai. Most of the people who are serious into bonsai concentrate on these large specimen trees like the dramatic junipers with driftwood, the aged pines, and beautiful specimen individual maples. But very seldom will you find examples of good forests treated seriously in bonsai, but they are nevertheless very, very beautiful things. This is an example of one of my maple groups. I imported part of this group in 1991 or 92, and when I imported it, it only had 11 trees. And the 11 trees is mainly the big ones at the back, and the pot was only about 35 to 40 centimeter in length in an oval pot. So that was the original size of the pot there. And over the years, I've added more and more trees to it. And today you will see that it is just full crammed with trees. I have lost count of the trees, because to my mind, the number of trees in a large group is not important. And I will explain to you why. But it is a very beautiful group. It's the third week in February, and although it's not quite spring, these maple buds are just beginning to break. I may have to look at it to see if I need to repot this tree, but I'm showing you this group in this condition because it has no leaves. Many people who are fairly new to bonsai always think that the bonsai without the leaves, the deciduous trees without their leaves, are not beautiful things. But for the purist, deciduous trees are best viewed when they are without their leaves, because you can see the structure of the branches. Like in this forest group, you can see the ramification of all the twigs. And in the summer, when the thing is full of leaves, you have to trim it about 3 or 4 times during the summer just to introduce space between the branches. It's so overgrown that you do not appreciate the structure of the trees. So really at this time of the year, when they are without their leaves, it is a very good time to look at the trees. So this is an example, I would say, of a very, very good forest planting. I used to show a lot of my bonsai at various exhibitions, including the Chelsea Flower Show, but I haven't done for the last 13 years because I didn't feel the need to do it anymore. But forest plantings and groups, although they are made from very simple bonsai or simple trees, used to attract the most attention from the general public. I'm not talking about the bonsai enthusiasts, I'm talking of the general public. The general public simply love the group plantings and forests because they look very natural. They can relate to it. And in fact, I once remember, I can't remember which bonsai artist remarked that when a group is very authentic and beautiful, like this one, you can almost see little birds flying through the branches. So this is the feeling and emotion that forest plantings evoke within you. So, okay, this is a good example, but let's show you other examples that have been made in the last 1 or 2 years. So if we move over to the larch, the Japanese larch is readily available in England, and we use it a lot for bonsai. So these are larches of different sizes. This group was made only in the autumn of last year, and as you can see, it's early spring, so the larches are beginning to break bud. The larch, for those of you who are not familiar with this species, is a deciduous conifer, one of the few deciduous conifers that you get. In fact, the Japanese call it the drop leaf pine, or karamatsu. That means a pine that has no leaves, karamatsu. So it's a naked pine. But they're very beautiful because the spring color is beautiful, this beautiful apple green. And in the autumn, they turn into that beautiful butter or golden yellow. This hasn't been trimmed since I planted it together, but it's still okay. The trimming I will show you, it's quite simple to do. This is another one that I did also in the autumn. And as you can see, it looks really authentic. I haven't talked about the numbers yet. I will speak to you about the numbers of the trees in a moment. And this is a larger example of some bigger larches. So you can make beautiful forests using larches. I will also show you how to trim them after I've given a demonstration of how to make these forest groups. Most of these groups at the moment, this is in a plastic pot. This in fact is in a seed tray, and that one is in a temporary plastic training pot. I planted it because it's deep. When we make groups, I don't think it's a very good idea to plant them straight away into bonsai pots, because the final pots are usually very shallow, and it may be a waste to use a good ceramic pot while the trees are in training. And as I said, this was only done last year. And once the roots mesh in the pot, you can take it out. And there you are. The roots are all meshed together. And then you can transfer to the final bonsai pot, ceramic pot if you wish. Or if you don't wish to use a proper bonsai pot, you can put it on a piece of slate, because the soil is not going to wash away. It will hold. And all you do is you mount the soil up to the side. This is a large cryptomeria group. And by the way, this is not slate. This is a piece of fiberglass that I cast from the original slate that we have. So, as I mentioned to you, this was planted in a long seed tray. And once the roots have meshed, the roots will hold the entire composition together. There is no danger of any of the trees falling out. And this is just a fiberglass cast piece. You can cast it if you work in fiberglass. If it was slate, it would be too heavy to lift. So this is just fiberglass. But if you looked at it and didn't know what it was, you would think that it is a genuine piece of slate. So using a seed tray or temporary planting tray to make the group makes sense. And once the roots are established, you can then put it on any piece of stone, slate, or pot as you wish. So that's another way of approaching it. I will now talk about numbers. This group has got, you won't believe it, it's got 6 trees. But does it make it any less beautiful? I don't think it does. When I come to making the groups, I will explain to you the significance of numbers, but while I'm showing you this group, I just show it to you because this group has 6 trees, and to a lot of bonsai purists, this would be a no-no, but not so. While we're talking of numbers, this large Acer palmatum forest that I partly created, because I told you I added trees to it, has 28 trees, but the fact that it is an even number doesn't detract from the beauty of this tree. I'll tell you a story of an exhibition I once attended in 1991 in Birmingham. And at this exhibition, there was a very beautiful trident maple forest. It was probably in a pot longer than this and no more than about 45 centimeter high. And they were just planted with young trident maple seedlings. And that group must have had, I would say, 50 or 60 small saplings in it. It was an extremely beautiful group and everyone was admiring it. And I was standing behind 2 so-called bonsai enthusiasts. You get these enthusiasts who think that they know a lot about bonsai. And one of them turned around to his friend and said to him that I've just counted the number of trees in this group. He must have stood there for about 15 minutes counting the trees. And he says, you know, there are 78 trees in that group. And it's a rubbish group because he's used even numbers. Now, I couldn't believe my ears because he said that it's rubbish because it was a group with even number 78. He said he should have used 77 or 79. I don't think that this person was quite right. Now, when we come to making the groups, I will explain to you the significance of numbers. So we will now move on to the practical side, showing you how to make these forests, because the forest is one of the easiest things to make. We're going to use these Japanese larch, and all these larches are beginning to bud. This is very early spring, but the larches come out into leaf very early. These are 4 to 5 year old young plants, and they've been grown in these pots, and I haven't potted them on since they were transplanted as seedlings, so they are fairly pot bound, which is good. So we will start with 5 or 7 trees and see how we get along. As you can see, they are extremely vigorous trees. Extremely vigorous trees. With forest groups, you can use trees which are not very good. And I remember once meeting a grower in Japan, and he said that all the rubbish seedlings and plants which are no good for making individual trees are destined for making the forest groups. So they don't put much value on those trees, but as you can see that these little things will become extremely beautiful once they're put together in a forest. So we will choose, let's start with 5 trees. I was talking to you about numbers. Now, the classical approach to making forests that you always use odd numbers and not even numbers. There is a bit of logic and reasoning behind that, but there is also a lot of traditional, I would say, superstition behind the use of particular types of numbers. If you go to Japan, China, Hong Kong, even Canada, where there's a large Chinese community, many of these condominiums and tall buildings and even hotels, you will not find a 4th floor and you will not find 13th floor. Okay, 4th is a very, very unlucky number, both to the Chinese, Japanese, and I would assume the Koreans and the Taiwanese as well. So number 4 is very unlucky, so they don't use 4 in making a forest. And the reason why they don't use the number 4 is because 4 in Chinese is pronounced sei, means to die. I would assume in Japanese as well, 4 means to die. So 4 is unlucky. So it's superstition really. They don't use 4. 3 is a very lucky number, so they use 5. Now, 8 in Chinese folklore is a very lucky number because 8 or part means to be prosperous. I don't see the logic of it because 2 4s, 2 unlucky numbers make a very lucky number. So that, shows how silly this superstition is. The reasoning why the odd numbers make sense, let me explain to you. Those of you who do European or English flower arranging will know that flowers are usually arranged with trees like that in triangular form. You'll get 3 sprays, and then you can fill in 2 more, and then you get 5 like that. So they do the flower arranging with 3s and 5s. So the aesthetic balance with odd numbers is more difficult to achieve than if you used even numbers, especially 3. See, 3 you get a lot of nice balance, but with 4, where would you put the 4th one? So that is why 3s and 5s are very commonly used in most of these aesthetic things. Now when we come to making a forest group, let's rush on. We will start by making, say, a 5-tree group. So I take these larches out of their pots, and I want to get to the base of the root where it starts. So the root ball is very compact, all of them. If I worked fast, I can make this in about 3 minutes, but I won't. I'll just show you step by step what I do. To make a group planting, we usually start by choosing the biggest or the tallest tree, and that is what we would call the principal tree. Now, each tree in the forest planting needs to be like a tall A shape, so slightly broader at the base, and as you go towards the top, and you see the A shape like that. And then same with this side. Make it taper all the way to the top. So that is one tree. So we do it to all of them. If you want to be a real purist, you should wire each of these individual branches so that they hang downwards. And of course, making them hang downwards make them look more like what real conifers should look like. So we will make each of these in that tall conical shape. Tall A shape. Got three there. The beauty of larches is that because they're deciduous trees, however hard you prune, they will bud back very easily. So they are very suitable for this type of pruning. Okay, so I've got my 5 trees. So we will put the principal tree there. Don't arrange them all in one straight line. Those of you who have my second book, Bonsai Masterclass, I go into great detail about making forest plantings, and lots of tips and arrangements, examples are shown in there. So what you shouldn't do is put it in a straight line. Just put them in different positions, staggered, and then you will get quite a nice composition. The other basic principle in making a group is that even though we are using separate trees, the entire composition, when complete, should be like a complete entity. So we make this group a conical shape. So the tallest one is in the middle, and then as it goes out to the side, they become shorter. So the short ones are the side. So the entire composition is triangular. So this seed tray, which is like 16 inches long, which would be like 40 centimeter long seed tray, I've only put 5 in there. Let's see what happens if I put a few more. When there are 5 trees like this, okay, it's a nice composition. If I took away one tree, it doesn't look so good. That's the dreaded number 4. If you use 3 trees, that looks quite nice. Well, I suppose 4 would also look nice, but that is 5. If I start putting another one, there's 6. Does it look bad? I don't think it looks bad because it's still okay. So why this obsession with numbers? Okay, 7 is there. If I put 8, which is an even number, I don't think it would detract from the beauty of the tree. Okay, this is taller, so I put it in the middle there. So we've got 8 over there. So the point I'm trying to make is that this obsession with numbers is only because someone said you should do that. Of course, the lower numbers like 3, 5s and 7s do make sense. But I have this theory that once you exceed the number 7, the eye cannot distinguish between odd and even numbers. So the question of numbers then becomes irrelevant. I know that a lot of the so-called bonsai classicists will disagree with me, but this is my honest opinion, and I'm quite happy to go along with that, because this is what people look at and this is what they admire. So we've got at the moment 8 trees. Let's carry on putting a few more. As I said, this group can take many more. So each tree I'm trimming into this conical shape. It's a nice thick one. And of course, if you want to put the trees really close to each other, as in that big maple group, I just trim the roots really hard, and you can even cut the roots off and butt them close together so that the trees are really close. And if you wish to, you can even tie it together to get them really close. That seed tray is not even half full, and I've got 9 trees. You notice that I'm cutting the trees to different heights so that I get a nice variation in heights. That's 10 trees there. This is 11. And it's nowhere near crammed. I can still get more. I reckon I can still get about another 7 trees in there. But it's just to show you the principle of making the forest. And we've got a very nice forest planting with those 11 trees. I won't add more to it because you can add certainly at least another 7 or 8 trees in there. I will show you a variation of the forest. If you have them as one group, you can also splay them out so that they fan out and you get a different effect. If you fan the trees out like this, you can make a forest with them all fanning out. So that's a variation of the forest. Another variation too is to have 2 groups, which is very popular. I'm very fond of doing the 2 group one, where you have one group of trees on one side and say another group of trees on another side. So you have like 2 forests, and then you can have little winding paths going through the middle. So that's another approach to making a forest. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that you should have them all at differing heights. So that one is a bit tall, I can cut this down. So have them of different heights. So there's this conical shape that you create, and that'll make it more interesting. The reason why you need different heights, if I show you a commercial group, some of the hardy Chinese elm groups that come from China, most of these trees are the same height and they don't look so interesting. So you can always break this up and make them look better. Another thing that you need to watch with these groups is don't have thick branches. Now this is only a commercial group, but what I would do, it's extremely pot bound. You can make root cuttings from these, but if these trees were mine, I would probably replant them in another way. But what I would do first of all is take some of these very thick branches off and let thin branches grow. See, there's another very thick branch there. I could do something with that. Or you can see if we splayed it out even. Plant it so that it splays out. And you see there's a different feeling altogether. Put it in a bigger pot and plant it splaying out like that. So that gives a different effect rather than all straight. So there are so many variations that you can create with this group. Now these are Japanese maple seedlings that we grow on the nursery. These are about 5 years old and they are over 1 meter tall, some of them, and you will notice that they have been pruned. If I hadn't pruned them, they would even be much taller than that. So the first pruning was done there and so on. It keeps growing on and on. So like this one, this was pruned there and it grew on. So it's had one pruning. So with trees like this, they're quite thick, I would say. They're almost like a small finger thick. But all these side shoots, I would cut off. And when you plant them, make sure that they are facing you straight. When you get a fork like that, we don't want the fork. So we want them growing straight. So each tree would be pruned like that. I'm not going to waste time making it, but it just shows that you do have to prune these like that. Always place the tree so that it looks straight, or if you do use it on the outer edge of the group. But if you plant it this way, it looks more straight, so you can get over the crooked nature of that tree by doing this rather than planting it like that. Where you get nice short branches like this one, again, and you can tease the roots however hard you wish. At this time of the year, which is very early spring, it's the ideal time to do these groups because you can play around with the roots and cut the roots as much as you want, and the trees will not come to any harm. I'm going to now show you how to make a trident maple group, because we planted these seedlings in these flower pots, but they're not these tall straight ones. They've got a lot of branches and they can be slightly more difficult to deal with. These trident maple plants must be at least 10 years old from seed. They have been allowed to grow because they will eventually become individual trees with a lot of branches. But I'm just showing you an example of how you can still make a group which is not just tall straight trees, but trees that have a fair number of side branches. So let's see what we have in here. With these vigorous trees, it's always a good idea to keep transplanting them, because if you were not careful, they will soon become so congested you'll never be able to disentangle them. So these have been planted in this pot maybe only just about a year, so they're still manageable. You can see that we can take them apart quite easily. So initially I'll just work on these 3 trees. Although I've got about 9 or 10 of them, I can make a very large group, but just to show you the principle of how to prune these trees when we use it in a group. So because it's got quite good ramification already, I'm going to exploit this to the full and keep it as a bushy tree. Because in nature you do find trees growing in the woods which are of this nature. So nothing to be worried about. This is a bit ugly there. Take that off. So that is one tree. And another one is this one. I'm making a group using trees which look more natural, you know, more domed, and a lot of twigs. So I can do that. And I'm using one of these seed trays. You can see a lot of good drainage here. And this is ideal for training the trees. And once the roots have meshed, I can then take it apart and put them in proper bonsai pot or even a piece of slate. So these trees, while they were growing in that flower pot, was constantly chopped and pruned back to create the ramification. And once we now put it in a group together, it'll get even more ramification. So what I'm trying to show is making a forest using trees that have a lot of branches like that. So because they've got so many branches and twigs, I think spacing them much wider apart makes more sense. So you wouldn't put them very close together because they wouldn't look right. If you wanted to make a trident maple forest with a lot of trees, then they would need to be tall, straight trees rather than trees which are much fuller like this. So that's all you do, and once you've done that, just fill it with soil, leave it to grow for maybe half a season. I would say by August to September all the roots would have meshed and you can take it apart.
Yes.
These are plants of English yew or Texas baccata, and they are 3-year-old plants grown from seed, and we usually make these into informal upright trees, but you can also use them in a forest. So what we would do is we would still prune it into a triangular shape, but because we're going to plant them quite wide apart, it would be better to wire each of these trees. So this is where you need to do a little more work than we normally do when we make a forest. So each of these trees we're going to wire up so that they look more like conical Christmas type tree images. So each of these branches will be wired down. If you remember, I was telling you about using the 2-branch principle, where we always wire 2 branches with 1 piece of wire. You notice there were 3 branches there, but I still wired that one with one which was already wired. I'm using 1mm wire. There are different gauges of wire, so you've got to match the grade of wire to the thickness of the branch that you're wiring. By wiring the branches downwards, you make the trees look more mature and slightly older. If they were not wired down, they spring upwards, they won't look so conifer-like. After all, a conifer means it's a cone-shaped tree. With the larches that we made, it also makes sense to wire those branches downwards, because it would just make it look more authentic. But while the tree is growing, you can always do that later on. So each individual tree is going to look like this as opposed to this. So what we would do, we would plant several trees like this together, maybe no more than 3. I've wired these yews. You see the difference? This is unwired and this is wired. So it looks more like a conifer. So it does pay to take some trouble to wire them, and they look much more mature. And because again they've got spreading branches, they would be better, more widely spaced. So now this one, I've done this group like a diagonal there, so that looks quite nice. You can also do one in the front and two at the back, like this. So these are the variations. So it's just to show that if you use these trees that have wide branches, you space them more widely, and that's how you get a quite different effect. So once again, it's to show you how simple it is to make these forest plantings, and it will give you a lot of enjoyment and a lot of pleasure. And this is the best time to do it. You can also do it throughout the summer, provided you don't cut too much of the root. So most of these compositions you can create most of the year, but spring is a very good time. So I hope you enjoyed this video about group plantings, and we will show you examples of groups that are in leaf, and you can enjoy seeing those pictures. Thank you.